Hi, hi.
Um, Lauren said, can you explain more about the puzzle piece and who that benefits?
Yes, Lauren. Okay. Yes, the puzzle pieces are, the puzzle piece is based upon the concept of wholeness. And the small pieces are to come. I'm hoping that enough of you will, by donation, purchase these small pieces if you have a desire to collect art. Um, However, it's not just that, it's the activity or the ritual of collecting the piece. And then when the pieces or the puzzle is divided, we have essentially divided this painting into a digital replica. And those pieces are puzzle pieces that we may all come back together when piece is exhibited, that we all come back together and replace the puzzle part in the greater whole. That's symbolic of the way of thinking that is moving us from a singular way of thinking and to realize that we are part of the collective. Now that's the concept behind it. It is the suggested donations are simply for the pricing cost to print and for shipping, and a portion of this will go to. I really wanted to talk about this, so are going to go to AGX Film Collective. And in that film collective, which is a fabulous collective of experimental filmmakers, it's housed in Waltham. And there's such a vibrant group of people experimenting and exploring chemistry-based film, 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter, where it's a do-it-yourself lab. And so a part of this will go to them as a way to support them during this time of artists who need support, financial support, or have lost their jobs. It's a time to support the artists around the globe for during the COVID pandemic. I hope that makes sense, Lauren. Can you send back a message if that answers your question? So yes, the Somerville Arts Council put a call out for the Home Alone series, which is what we are doing at this moment. And with that, it's teaching, it's working as painters and artists, and this is in support of artists in Somerville, in the Somerville Arts Council, which is up here and established to do this very thing. So, and the Somerville Arts Council, you can go to their website as well. There are other, every Tuesday and Thursday, there's an artist talk of some kind that is being broadcast on Facebook Live.
Say yes.
Lauren says yes?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you for asking that particular question. I'm going to tell you how I became an artist in the first place, because it was not something that most people will, at least sociologically speaking, most people will decide to become an artist around 12 to 13 years old. That's when people start on their own. They're making that commitment, and that was not the case for me. Now, a little bit of this concept of the collective, the connected, and the in-between, and I want to do that by, I hope you'll take a minute and go to the website as well, unless that cuts you off from me. which we don't want to do. But I'm wondering what that means, the collective, because there are things that went through my mind as I was coming up with the title of that for the artist talk. And what I was wondering about was these kinds of questions. Well, what is the collective? You know, Jung talked about the collective conscious, the unconscious, and that we all dream in one way, in one way or another, as a collective. That's also quite Native American in its philosophy as well. And then the connected, that it seems to be the connections that we decide to make or we decide to forge. There can be all kinds of connections. There can be relationship connections. There can be familial connections. There can be connected. We're all connected in some way. And we're all different in some way. And then the in-between is that area of idea that I am most comfortable with, which is a reaching across the disciplines, reaching across the disciplines. And I would love to hear from you in the audience what you imagine that might mean for yourself. And you probably, I'm sure there must be some interdisciplinary artists listening, and it would be very interesting to have that discussion interactively as well. So feel free to chat, send that in as a chat, because that's something that I find is the in-between that is interesting. I wish I could go to the website and talk a little bit about some of the paintings, because we don't have a way to really do that interactively, but one thing I would love for you to look at on the website also is Creation of a Universe. That group of collection of paintings is also significant to the kind of work that I am interested in doing and continuing to do. I remember the first that I, as a painter, I remember this very clearly as a child, where I'm the daughter of two educators. There were three generations of educators, and I remember being on the university campus when my parents were getting their graduate degrees, and every night after dinner we would go for a walk in the neighborhood, especially in the summer. And the neighborhood was married student housing. But it was so lovely just to take that walk, a casual walk, and that was the moment that I would look, moments, it was quiet, but I was concerned with the sky, and I was concerned with wondering, and this, I can think from the time that I was 5 years old, I would always look to the sky for inspiration. And I remember wondering what's on the other side of that sky. A childhood wondering, and I realized that my paintings, much later in life, I realized that my paintings are still asking that question: what's on the other side of the sky? Of course, now we have Hubble, and we have other deep space telescopes that we can look to, and I'm very connected to that. I'm very connected emotionally to the events of the sky. But that was my first moment of what is it that I want to do or be or to paint. I just knew that I wanted to be a part of the sky. Yes, so I think we have a question.
Daniel said to add in on the chat on our own interdisciplinary work. I'm always striving for a way to link and connect my writing in film philosophy and theory with my own movie making.
Yes.
And
Are they hearing you?
they are.
Okay.
And Larissa
Larissa?
has a question. Please tell us about your experience as an educator.
Yes. Okay. Great. Where do I start? Let me count the ways. Well, I happily teach at Emerson College, where these two great interns have just finished. They're smiling at me. And I teach a class there, a course, a seminar at Emerson called Animation Histories. I haven't talked to you about my experimental animation, but because it came later in life. When I was an artist in resident in painting at the American Center in Paris. And while I was there, I realized that I wanted my paintings to move in time. But I didn't know what that meant. That's just all I knew. It was the idea. Once again, always going back to the idea. And so I set about trying to find what that means. I remember thinking, is that film? Is that called animation? I'm not sure. Well, as the story turns out, I decided to go back to school and get another master's degree, this time an MFA in experimental animation at California Institute of the Arts, CalArts. And then from that moment, my career took a different trajectory, and for a while. And and I began teaching that within that field, within that area of expertise in the world of animation. So by the time I started trying to find a wonderful place to serve as an affiliated faculty to teach. And so I went into Emerson designing the curriculum for a course called Animation Histories. Now it's a seminar, so it's Animation Histories : and then the topic changes every year or every semester. And that's my experience teaching. I find that most teaching in the world of higher education, I had taught in higher education previously, always taught at least one class. Even when I was at CalArts, I was teaching at Los Angeles College just because it's in the family business. And I love teaching. It's really wonderful to see the light come on in a student's eye when something makes sense and to them. And you'll see on my website, you'll see photographs of some of the teaching experience that I have had. I still teach now, and I also have taught experimental animation production as well, which again is that interdisciplinary pull between the making and the conceiving. Did you have another question?
But we have feedback.
Good.
Lauren said, I love the connection between your story and of wanting to be part of the sky and how the painting looks to me like a variation of the sky.
Thank you, Lauren. That's very lovely. I feel that, and I'm glad that you feel that too, that you understand what I'm talking about. It's very interesting because I began these paintings before the Hubble. And this was when I was living in the south of France. And before the Hubble, we didn't know what was on the other side of the sky. But after the Hubble telescope, we're deep space. After the Hubble telescope, then and when images started coming back, it's really interesting because the pieces on my website called Creation of a Universe, not the universe, are visualizations of what I truly think was on the other side of the sky. It's what I imagined it is. And when some of the images came back, you can even go to the NASA website or even the Harvard NASA website and look at some of those images and look at creation of the universe, and they are extremely similar. So I was imagining and visualizing before the Hubble. So I was really excited when the Hubble telescope started sending things back, and they looked like my paintings. Both ways. That my paintings looked like theirs and theirs looked like mine. I'm looking at Wayne to see if there are other comments.
Not right now, but people said it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. So let's see. What else might I tell you? I must say I'm thinking of my dear mother at this moment, who was also a storyteller, and she was also a Faulkner scholar, and she was in love with William Shakespeare for many years. And so I'm thinking about her and her influence on me in that interdisciplinary way. She was she's no longer living, and she was as an 17-year-old. You may hear a slight Southern accent in my language, in my dialect. If you do, that's because I grew up in the South. And as a 17-year-old in Mississippi, she got a fellowship to Juilliard to study piano, and this was in the 30s. And I remember when I didn't know much about that, because she early on left that decision to be a pianist and to become an English professor, because she was in love with, at the time at 18, she was in love with poetry, specifically Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And but much later in life, I saw her sit down at a piano, and it just flowed out of her. And I was always accustomed to her as an academic and a Faulkner scholar that she loved so much. And we would tease her about sitting at home reading Faulkner. The children would. And so I'm thinking about her as I'm telling you these stories, that love of the creative and the love of the intellectual was taught to us very early on as children, and essentially it's a love of learning.
We have two questions here.
Okay.
So the first one from Brooke Steller.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Brooke.
Do you feel like you can leave Do you feel like you can leave your body and travel the universe? And
Brooke, I'm not. Brooke, are you saying that you can? I don't feel that I'm leaving my body. No, I like my body. I like the earth. But But my imagination definitely goes beyond the spheres. I'm not sure what Wayne is reading. Brooke, are you there?
Also, is that okay? So, this one from Eliza. So we are just coming in. We can only see part of your piece. Can we see the full piece somewhere?
Website. My website. Ta-da!
Here. Lisa also posted down in the comment area of the website as well.
Posted what?
on the comment section of the website as well.
Okay, good. I want to hear Brooks reply. Brooks Tyler is a wonderful artist himself.
This one from Eraser. Part of your piece reminds me of New Mexican pottery, the horsehair lines.
I can see why. By the way, I adore New Mexico. Just adore it, and almost moved there because I find that it's almost a magical experience from the earth. I know when I'm driving, I used to drive often back from LA to the East Coast to Los Angeles, and because I lived there for 9 years, and I would always know that somehow I was in the New Mexican border because I felt that sense of magic. So I'm not surprised that you I'm not surprised that you see some of that in this. Plus it's this red earth color. Again, I'm not referring to any specific thing outside the painting itself. It imbues it, but it doesn't represent it.
No comments.
No comments. Okay. Now where shall we go? Where shall we travel next? Thinking.
Do you want to talk about the website and about the instructions as well?
Yes, we can do that. Yeah, that's good. Let's talk about that. So if you go, once again, if you go to janeanndill-artist.com/Somerville Arts Council, you will be able to see just hundreds of swatches of sections of this painting. Some are small, some are medium, some are large. And also there's a section that is a silent auction. And the silent auction has some of the pieces that fell a little bit outside the elements of the parameters of small, medium, and large, or at least small and medium. And if you go there, it's just a pure, at least for me, I'm reminded of color swatches. Oh, I know what I'm going to talk about next. And the color swatches, you know, I love going into a hardware store and just getting those paint samples and looking at them and having them around me because I love color. And so you can make sure that you click on singular images throughout the website, because by clicking on that singular image, you'll get information. And everything is written underneath. They're numbered, and there's the suggested donation and what the minimum donation is that would cover the printing cost and the shipping fees. And select. And so there's a donate button. You donate whatever it is, and then by that time you'll go to PayPal, and you'll have a transaction number, which is also a receipt number. And then you'll need to come back. It's a two-step process. Then you'll come back and fill out that form with your transaction number in that, and then we will know that you have purchased that piece by donation, and we'll save it, and it's yours, and then we'll be in touch with you to match it all, and be sure and fill in your shipping address. Alyssa, is there anything else that I didn't speak about in terms of the how-to?
No, and the how-to, the instructions will all be listed next to the form you have to fill out as well, and the contact.
One more question from Brooke.
Okay.
Do you think your imagining of Beyond the Sky and the Hubble images being so close is just a coincidence?
If I believed in coincidence, but I don't. And what I think is that it's all energy. And so in the sense of physics, really, gravity, and so I don't think of it that way. I do know that this has no gravity. I do know that. Earlier when I was talking about Jackson Pollock, and he moved from painting about action to being the action and doing the action and was the action, with his enormously stunning and compelling work, canvases, huge canvases. It's more that I'm in it, that my mind's eye and my imagination are in the space of the same people who were thinking when they created the lenses and the telescope itself, Hubble, and I just think it's a field of inquiry more than anything else. And in many ways, the way that I create is really using a very experimental science approach. Experimental is a word that means you just don't know the outcome. It doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing, and it doesn't mean that you don't know where to begin. There is a structure, a very fine structure, and it's called the concept. The idea is what is leading the parade there.
Here's a question from Lisa.
Okay.
You mentioned your synesthesia and how it relates to music. I'm wondering if it also affects your perception and love of color.
Absolutely, and I thanks for bringing color back. When I was an undergraduate, a million years ago, this was at Vanderbilt University where I got my first degree, and there was a book in the basement of the library. Why are all the greatest books in the basements of libraries? And it was a dark, dungy basement. And I remember learning about Black Mountain College and Joseph Albers. And so I started looking around for Joseph Albers. And Joseph Albers, for those of you who may not recognize that name, was a faculty at the Bauhaus in Germany, and because of the Third Reich, he came to America. And when he came to America, he settled into this extraordinary educational institution called Black Mountain College in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And so when I saw and learned in my art history classes about, not about Black Mountain College, that was actually a popular book on that, was going around within the art circles. And I discovered Joseph Albers, and his pedagogical approach and his studies of color. Now his paintings, if you're aware of paintings at all, they all have 3 or 4 squares. One large one, and they're all on the lower horizon line of the squares. And what he was interested in is what happens if you put this color next to this color? Does it change the perception of the colors? If you have gray next to purple, depending on the hue, what happens? Well, I read that huge book. I think it's actually out as a book now that's not volumes and volumes. But this also this was a volume that he had written that showed the examples of everything he was talking about. So I don't know if the new book has that. But I absolutely love color, and thanks for linking color, synesthesia, and music, because you know, composers often talk about tones and colorful tones, and if it's a cool tone, or and the same thing is true with colorists. I definitely consider myself a colorist, and I will refer you to a book that I always refer my students to, which is Kandinsky's Concerning the Spiritual in Art. And that is a beautiful little book. It's, you know, you can probably find it on an aggregator, aidbooks.com, for 50 cents for the original one, which was, I think, was in the 70s. But Kandinsky was very involved in color as well, and form and abstraction. He was one of our very first theorists for contemporary artists. So yes, energy, vibration, frequency. You can talk about those concepts, those elements, those modes across music, across poetry, across film, across name physics. You know, you can talk across all those fields.
Brooke said, "Thanks for your comments." And one question from Maria Teresa. She said, "Beautiful work, Dr. Dill. You are inspiration and an incredible force, all capital."
Yay.
Very synesthetic response and energy experiences with this piece for me. Can you talk about conversation for communication with the piece that you have with it while it has been forming? What is being experienced during your process?
Contemplation, mostly, a sense of the mysterious. Conversations with the piece as I'm working. You know, I'm sure you've heard this from writers as well, when they say that after a while the book tells you what to write, the characters come to you, the words come to you. I've heard many writers talk about that, especially novelists. And I find that to be true for myself as a writer as well. So it tells the painting after. Okay, the first thing that has to happen is that, and I talk about this often with my students, the first thing that has to happen is that you have to, quote unquote, kill the white. Now you can imagine this canvas, this size canvas, with nothing on it. Well, it's a big, overwhelming experience. You know, you want to look at it and go, what the hell am I going to do now? You know, but what does not happen for me is that once I make a mark, any mark, doesn't matter what the mark is, then that gives me something to respond to. And so I wouldn't call it conversation, I would call it dialogue, which is close to what you're talking about. But eventually I don't know how to explain the moment of the creative process. The closest thing to it is contemplation for me. And response.
I have 5 more minutes, and right now that's all the question.
Okay, well let me just summarize, and we will then close. I think it would be really nice if you guys who are listening would post your comments on my Facebook page so that I can see them again, and also on the Somerville Arts Council page. I think go there and make some comments on the Facebook page for Somerville Arts Council too. And again, I very much want to thank Laritza at the Somerville Arts Council for inviting me. Thank you, Laritza. I would not be here if it were not for you. And again, these wonderful students, you've heard them talking in the background. They're no longer my students, but they're just as wonderful as when they were. Who else do I want to thank? Because it's really, I think it's important that we that we remember whose shoulders we're standing on to get to where we're going. I think the title of the talk itself is a summation of my gratitude, and that is looking at thinking and thinking as action, concept as creativity, intuition as response, and then the connected. I feel very connected, although it seems like most of the time I'm not sure. I always say I'm talking to the wind. So the comments that you're making are very important to hear, for me to hear. And then in this in-between world right now, where we're coming out of this strange, bizarre takeover by a disease, I'm gratified to have this time in this moment to spend with you. I think there's one more question.
There is one more question from Daniel.
Yes.
What defines the process, or more appropriate term, the production of the experimental art? I know you said it's of course defined by concept, and the outcome is not necessarily known, but what would you say are other defining features in your mind?
Well, I just say that in terms of defining features, I wouldn't call them defining features. I would say they're a result of a solidarity with concept. Idea, which is concept. Concept is idea. And that's a philosophy. That's a philosophy. And I would say that it's the intuitive at that point has somewhere to go, because it has an intellectual grounding, and the grounding of concept then allows the intuitive, which is the spontaneous response. Now you have to educate your intuition. Just don't get to nirvana by sitting around and wishing that utopia would happen. It's hard work. It's hard work to get there. And I don't mean hard, difficult. I mean it's a disciplinary commitment. And so I would say that the only way I can say this, Daniel, perhaps you will be the one to look at other defining features. But for me, the concept is the North Star. That's where I know I'm going. I have somewhere to ground myself. And when I forget where I'm going, I return to the concept and I have a renewed sense of where I'm going again. And so I get to explore. Well, I would say exploration would be another, a feature. I wouldn't call it a defining feature, but it's a feature. And research, of course, research. You know, the research is what's going to inspire and imbue your intuitive self into the world of concept, the conceptual.
Maria, thank you, and Eliza said, great to see and hear you.
Thank you, and thank you guys for checking in. I'm getting that their minutes are gone. Bye.